Welcome. My name is Russ Charvonia. I'm president of the Worldwide Civility Council, and it's my extreme pleasure to welcome to this podcast Cassandra, Dahnke, and Tomas Spath, who are co-founders of the Institute for Civility in Government. And more importantly than that, I consider them both to be my dear friends. So Cassandra and Tomas, welcome.
We thank
you for having us.
Yeah.
If you'll share a little bit with our audience as to how the Institute for Civility in Government came around. It sounds like it's a really intimidating concept to try to breed any kind of civility into our government. So how did it happen?
Well, back in the 1990s, Tomas and I worked together in the context of a regional office of the Presbyterian Church, USA. And our portfolio focused on social justice issues. Actually, Tomas was my supervisor at that point.
Still am.
He wishes. And so we had just attended a meeting, I believe it was about homelessness, and at the city level. And as we were walking back to the car, we were in conversation about the strategies and such, and we found out that we were on opposite sides of the political aisle. And we both just kind of stopped in our tracks and looked at each other because we were so amazed that the other person thought the way that they did. And that started our journey toward being in conversation with someone who thought very differently than ourselves. And so basically everything that we've learned about civility, we had to learn ourselves. We had to teach ourselves because we were working together and we had very different ideas and still do about a great many things. So then we started leading groups of Presbyterians from Southeast Texas to Washington, D.C. to advocate on social justice issues, but our conferences were a little different from the norm. Instead of taking people to D.C. Who all were passionate about one single issue and all felt pretty much the same and went to D.C. to be told what to say on Capitol Hill and then went and repeated it, we brought really diverse groups of people to D.C. Some were clergy, some were not. Some were very involved politically, and some had never voted in their lives, but the cherry blossoms were in bloom, so they were going to go along with us. Very conservative, very liberal, lots of people in between. And instead of telling them what we were going to go to DC for, we let them determine the agenda. So the groups would, we developed a process by which they chose 5 issues that they really cared about. And everybody was a part of that decision-making process. We did a lot of background work before we ever went to DC, provided them lots of information about the issues from diverse sources, did some group building, took off and went to DC. Our smallest group, incidentally, was 25. Our largest was 45. And everybody had so much fun over the weekend, seeing the sights, sharing meals, going to worship, just had a whole lot of fun. And then on Monday mornings, we would arrange a briefing on Capitol Hill for them on the issues they'd chosen. And then we said, well, if we're all going to take a position at, for example, the Senate offices, because the senators represented everybody who was at the conference, then everybody in the group needs to agree on what we're going to say.
Oh, no.
And it didn't get ugly, but it just went silent because all of a sudden the person who was so much fun as a dinner conversationalist or, looking at the museums or whatever, proved to be to think very differently. Let me put it nicely. They obviously thought very differently, and they didn't want to get ugly. They had become friends, but they really didn't know how to go forward. They didn't know how to talk honestly in the midst of their differences. And that's when Tomas and I realized that in this country, we really don't have the skill set. That's not taught to us about how to manage some of those difficult conversations. So Tomas, why don't you take it from there?
So the groups that we took were represented by 7 congressional districts of Southeast Texas. So our groups met with all 7 representatives when we went to DC, and they shared their thoughts and their ideas. One of the representatives, which happened to have been our representative, he called us into his office after we did this for about 5 years. And he sat us down in his office and he looked at us and he said, "You guys realize what you're doing?" And so we said, well, what are you talking about? And he says, "You are the only ones that come to Washington, D.C. and bring us ideas. You need to multiply yourselves. You need to create more people like you because we need you." And that was Congressman Bill Archer. So we looked at each other and we said to him, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And Mr. Archer looked at us and said, "Well, go figure, go do it yourself. You came up with the idea of bringing these diverse groups, go and figure out how to do it." So we took we started to look for groups of people that worked with elected officials and with constituents, and then tried to focus on building a relationship between the two. And since we couldn't find anybody, we just took a big swallow one night and decided to do it ourselves. And so we talked about what we could do, and we came up with the idea of having like a congressional town hall.
Congressional student forum, basically, is what we were doing.
But instead of having a congressional town hall meeting, we thought that, well, maybe we should go to universities and invite students to set the agenda, and we bring 2 members of Congress. Because every time I went to a Republican town hall meeting, I walked out of that room along with everybody else thinking that the Democrats blocked every piece of legislation. And the very same day, I would go to a Democratic town hall meeting and boom, the same thing happened, except that it wasn't the Democrats that blocked the pieces of legislation, it was the blooming Republicans. And so when we went back to talk to Mr. Archer, we said, "You all are teaching polarization because you need to get reelected." That's what he basically said to us. I got to make sure that my people will vote for me. So I got to talk down my opponents. And we said, well, what would happen if we bring you and a member of the Democratic Party together and we go to a university campus and we have a dialogue? He says, "Are you going to invite the media?" We said, "No." He said, "Good, we'll do it." So that's the dream, is that throughout our country, we have dialogues between 2 members of Congress that represent different parties and talk about the issues that the constituents care about. And so we launched the Institute with that idea.
Now, what you just described, Tomas, seems to be a lost art, not only in society in general, but especially on Capitol Hill. And do you have any thoughts as to why that is?
Well, one of the things that is happening in our country right now is that the voters are electing people that they like. And so everybody likes their representative. But then all of the representatives that are going are kind of like extremists, people that are way to the left or way to the right. And the people that are in the middle are not being elected so much anymore. And so when you have the extremes that are being elected and go to Washington, D.C., it's going to be extremely difficult to get people to start working together.
Put it another way, Tomas. Everybody's always voted for people that they like, so I'm going to take issue with that. That's not a recent development. But as districts have been drawn in such a way as to create safe districts that are primarily Republican or primarily Democrat, it has made it possible for those who are running to play to their base. And they don't necessarily need to appeal to a broad cross range of voters in order to be elected. And that's what has led, I believe, to what Tomas was saying, people who are less moderate and free to be from the further fringes, shall we say. So the way districts are drawn is a huge issue in this country, and one that I think some states are starting to address in how they go about designing their districts or voting in the primaries. Rated voting, I believe ranked voting is beginning to catch on in some places so that people have a broader range of choices. But one of the things that really makes our congressional student forums different is that not only do we bring two people from different sides of the political aisle, but it's really set up as a conversation. It's not a debate. Their responses are not timed. As Tomas mentioned, the media is not there. We really create a safe place for conversation. And while these congressional student forums are really difficult to set up, just because you're playing with so many different schedules that are formulated in different ways, when they happen, they are pure magic and just so uplifting. There is humor, there's camaraderie. People are honest about their differences, their philosophical and political differences, but they express them in a way that gives everybody room to breathe and consider what's being heard. And that is so refreshing and very encouraging. And as Tomas said, the dream is that someday everyone who's elected to Congress will turn to their scheduler and say, when's my congressional student forum and who will I do it with? Because while we understood that these would be very helpful to the students, who for many are involved in their first civic engagement, and who we empowered to set the agenda through their questions. We did not anticipate how much it would mean to the members of Congress who have, after they have participated, have said, this is the best thing ever. I love being able to sit with my colleague. There aren't many opportunities for us to do that in a public space. And to build those relationships that are not absent from Capitol Hill, but aren't highlighted. They're not public. They're behind the scenes, and we don't often hear about them because the media doesn't pick up on them.
So by focusing on the young people, you're clearly investing in the future. If each of you could write the script for what the US government looks like in 2050, what's your vision?
In when?
2050.
All right, we'll make it 2035, 15 years from now.
Yeah, give us a little while. Because we went to a conference and the keynote speaker, who we had never heard of before, but we were also speaking at that conference. He started speaking about the history of social movements and made a point that most social movements that bring significant change take 60 years. At which point Tomas and I looked at each other and said, oh my God, because at that point, Tomas, I think we were what, maybe 12 years into it, 11 years or something.
Right. And I remember I hit your elbow and I said, I didn't sign up for a 60-year project, did you?
And but his points were very well taken and well substantiated. And so while we knew we were in this for the long haul, it appears it may be longer than we thought. Still, that doesn't mean this can't happen. And it's with that attitude that we started the Institute, and we really thought we would be over the top successful within 2 years, because this is so doable. If people just join together, the power of social movements, the power of the people has been proven over and over and over again in the United States. That is without question. It's just when we set our minds to it and when we commit to it and when we are ready to go the long haul. So we did set this up as a membership organization. And as our influence grows, which I am confident it will, the members of Congress will listen. The city council people will listen. The state representatives will listen. It's about developing that culture of expectation and norms. Norms have shifted in the past, and they will continue to shift in the future. And we just need to do our best to determine which way those shifts take place. So you're giving me 15 years. I don't have a crystal ball, but I remain optimistic.
Well, if I can add to that, the founders of our nation, they were very concerned about how to set up a governing system where the constituents are involved. And they were very concerned about the uneducated constituent. How can we educate them? And so they founded this nation hoping that the people would be involved. And today, many people choose not to vote. And that means that we are not engaged. Therefore, we have a government that is running rampant, and it's full of money, because money talks in Washington, D.C. And so they listen to the money. And if the real job of an elected official is not to represent their own ideas, the real job is to represent the people so that they get elected. The real job is to be reelected. And so all of their thinking, a politician has to think about, what can I do to make sure that people will continue to vote for me? And so it's the system is set up now so that there's a lot of congressional districts that are safe. But one of the things that we do as an institute is we visit congressional offices on a yearly basis. And we tell the offices that there are so many people in their district that support the civility movement. And in knocking on the doors, I always could tell if when I walked into a congressional office, if the office was either Republican or Democrat by just looking at the wall. When you look at the wall, you see a picture of a president. So if the president's face on that wall is a Democratic person, I'm in a Democratic office. If I'm in a Republican office, I will see the picture of a Republican president. Well, here I am running around congressional offices, and I walk into this one office and they totally confused me, because I saw not only a picture of President George Bush, but I also saw a picture of Bill Clinton. And I said, whoa, what's going on here? Oh, well, we're centrists. we put both of our presidents, we put both sides up on the wall. And this was a congressional office that was from the state of Iowa. And they taught me at that point that the way in which they draw their district maps is by forming a commission made up of recently retired elected officials in the state of Iowa. And they put the same number of former elected officials in the room, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. They give them all of the demographics that the computers have about how people voted in all of these areas. And they're supposed to draw up every single state district, federal district, state district, and local district, 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. So that the person who wins in Iowa is somebody that has to represent the center, because they have to win the most votes from the other side. And when I speak with a representative from Iowa, I can tell that they are very centrist minded because of the way in which they operate. But the state of Iowa is the only state that does this.
And that's true to this day. They still do it that way?
To this day, they still do it. And they tell me that it doesn't work as great now, but the theory is behind it so that they elect centrist type people. And, I think we need a third of members of Congress to be that way. We need a third that are maybe to the right and a third to be to the left. That's when you really create a good conglomerate type vision. And so I would love to see that develop and take place in the future. Mm-hmm. But I was just going to say that in 20 years, I thought the guy said it wasn't 60 years, but I thought he said 40 years. It takes 40 years for a generation to kind of take
Well,
over.
it feels like 60 years.
20 feels like 60 years. Come on.
Well, we've been at this for 20 years. So in 20 years, we expect to have a president elected in this country that will run on the topic of, I am going to be civil.
From your mouth to God's ear.
I hope so.
Well, if you go back and look, virtually every presidential inaugural address for the last several decades at least has brought up a theme of civility. Every single one, no matter which party they're from, no matter if it's their first time around or they've been reelected, every single one talks about civility, and yet it is difficult to cause it to manifest itself. And that's something that the people within this country, I think civility is something that we all took for granted for a long time, whether at the local level within our own lives or prior to the polarization of the media. Back when there was the fairness doctrine, we knew that if one position was given coverage on the news media, that another position would get equal time. And since that vanished, we no longer have that expectation. If you want equal time, you have to change channels. And most people are not willing to do that. So we have become more siloed and realized at the same time that the lack of civility has been, or the presence of civility has been unraveling over time. Like any other value or quality or practice, it takes intentionality, and we have to work to maintain the fabric of society the way we want it to look. So if we want civility, we have to work for it and not just wish it so.
You both are talking about generational issues, and I've had people in my travels tell me that, this period of incivility is just cyclical, and if we wait it out, we'll get back to a good level again. And my response to them is twofold. One is, what would be wrong with us shortening this negative period if we can? We
Amen.
want better. But my other bigger concern is that this period of incivility may become so much a part of our moral fabric, so much a part of our habit, especially among our young people who are witnessing it in the adults in their lives, that we can't turn it around for a generation or more.
That is a concern, because so many of us who've been around a little bit longer can remember when things were different. And our younger generation does not have that benefit of hindsight. And so I share your concerns.
Yeah, we both do.
The other thing that seems to be happening is both sides are weaponizing, if you will, the concept of civility, claiming that the other side is using it to shut down difficult conversations. Are you seeing that happening? And if so, what in the world can we do about it?
Well, there is a great deal of debate about whether civility is just pushing political correctness, which rubs some people the wrong way, of whether it is, as you say, trying to shut down voices that have traditionally been unheard. And the way I understand civility, that is not true. But everybody doesn't have a common understanding of what civility is. Some people think it's just simply good manners, which of course are a part of it. But it's true civility, as we understand it, it requires much more skill and harder work than simply holding the door open for somebody. We define civility as claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else's in the process. So it's not about going along to get along, which is another view of civility that some people have, but doing the hard work of claiming who you are and what you believe and why, while allowing other people the space to do the same and do it in a respectful way. Some people think that, for example, protest or civil disobedience is something that civility would not be supportive of. But I don't think you could find a greater example of civility than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was simply claiming and caring for his identity, needs, and beliefs in a way it could be heard, but not degrading others, not degrading others in the process. Just perhaps the demonstrations he led were not verbal, were not interviews on TVs or something like that. It was a different kind of communication, but that didn't make it any less civil. And that's how I personally see peaceful protest as not only a right in this country, but a very civil expression of positions, as long as they're peaceful. Once they go beyond that bounds, of course, then they become very uncivil. But I think that sometimes people have to raise their voices in order to be heard, but there are ways to do that that are appropriate and ways that are not. And so that's my take on that kind of conversation.
So we're teaching people for quite a while now, over 20 years, that civility does matter. And one of the places where I point to people to an area of hope is the Google search engine. Because in 1998, when we established the Institute for Civility in Government, I asked Dr. Google to give me all of the websites that deal with civility in government. it only found one website in the whole world, and it was our institute that was highlighted, and it was the only page. So I just did a Google search and of civility in government, and the result is that there's 14,100,000 pages on civility in government on the internet.
Wow.
So if that doesn't tell you that the movement is grown, I don't know what it is.
Well,
But every single major university now has a civility emphasis, and every single member of Congress now uses that word more often than not. And so, we never used to. When we started our institute, we walked the halls of Congress. People thought we were crazy, and they said, "Civility? Are you sure? You're promoting civility? What's that?" And we had to explain. And but we don't have to explain anymore. So the movement is growing, and it's catching fire. The 14 million pages is due to the fact that there's a lot of local initiatives throughout our country where people are working with their town hall, their local town halls, and the mayors and just the representatives that are local.
To get my shameless plug in, when I started getting involved with the whole civility effort 6.5 years ago, the word civility was not yet defined in Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge. And if our listeners go to Wikipedia, search the word civility, then it showed them see incivility. It was easier to define what civility is not than what it is. But if they search it today, they will see a definition. It's a definition that our efforts was able to get on there.
Yeah, and that's great. That's wonderful.
On an anecdotal note, Russ, were asking, or you brought up the issue that some people think that civility is a means of shutting people up or limiting conversation, shall we say, or personal expression. While we used to take adults to Washington, D.C. back in the 90s, once we started the Institute, which was in 1998, and launched on April Fool's Day on Capitol Hill, incidentally, hoping that wouldn't be prophetic. But in 2007, we started working with high school youth. And that in itself is a wonderful story that I won't go into right now, but that is a program that has expanded. And what we do is take small groups of high school students, 10 to 14 at a time, which allows for a lot of deep conversation among all the participants and sharing. And we teach them civility skills before we ever take them to DC. And these are not students who know each other well. They're not all from the same class. They may have seen the other person in the hallway, or maybe not. And so they're just getting to know each other for the first time. We took a group of Boy Scouts one time. They weren't all from the same school. They'd never met each other before. So these are people who are just getting to know each other. But because we teach them those civility skills, and we give them the time to get to know one another and to have serious, intentional conversation with civility as the one ground rule, it really enables them, rather than squashing the conversation, it lifts the conversation up. It opens the door of possibility. It gives them a freedom to be fully present and to express themselves in ways that can be heard, maybe not agreed with, because believe me, they've all had very different ideas about everything. But they learn from each other, and they start to really to take a a word from generations ago, to groove on those conversations, and to enjoy getting to know one another and to learn those different opinions and why they have those different opinions. And so rather than civility being something that hinders conversation or position taking, it's actually something that opens up the possibility and lifts it up. And one of the things that has happened with every group we've taken, whether it's been youth or adults, these trips have changed lives. But particularly the youth have come back and said, I have a new family now. And they're talking about the other youth on the trip, and they get so close to one another, and it's a closeness that continues, and they stay in touch with one another. And so that's always a joy to watch, but it shows that civility works. Civility helps. They don't feel like, well, I can't say anything because I might offend someone. No, they can say things. They have to think about the way they're going to have to say it, but that helps them think more about what they're going to say. And it's just been it's been a joy to watch this happen over and over and over again. I've often said I've been to Washington, D.C. so many times now, I lost count, but I never get tired of taking these groups, again, whether it's youth or adults, because it's such an awakening experience. It's an awakening of civic duty, civic possibility, history, being part of really being a part of the country and not just living in the country, and personal responsibility, but personal possibility too. And that's huge and can change. That can move mountains.
I have to believe you helped to create future leaders with the students that you've taken back to DC.
Oh, absolutely. Several of them have gone on to do internships, whether at congressional offices or mayor's offices. Some who had never thought much about going to college have come back fired up to go to college and have done that. One of them from the very first trip is now on our board of directors. They are getting involved in their communities in significant ways and seeing the power that they have to enact the change that they think needs to happen. And again, these kids are all over the place politically. I remember particularly with the Boy Scout troop, on one of their afternoons when they were exploring, they came back and one had a blue baseball cap on, and I won't tell you what it said, and one had a red baseball cap on, and I won't tell you what it said either. But they wore them proudly, and they wore them together, and they were good friends. And that was just a visual example of what happens on every trip.
That also happened with our adult groups in the 1990s. And one pairing that I made because they wanted to talk together to a member of Congress about some issues. And the gentleman was he was a senior citizen, and he was a staunch Republican. And that the young gal was a staunch Democrat. She protested in many places, and she marched here and there, and she was always out there. In the community, she was pretty well known. And I suggested that this woman go with this Republican guy to talk to Mr. Bill Archer. And she told me, oh, no, I can't do it. No, that you think I should do that? And I said, yes, I really think you should go. Because, the gentleman is a member of his district. And let him talk about his issues. You talk about your issues and see what happens. Well, she came back out of that meeting. She was so blown away. She was saying, oh my gosh, I don't think Mr. Archer would have listened to me as much as he did, because one of his, one of my friends was with me. And so we have these walls that we build between each other. And the walls really don't exist if we would just have the courage to say hello to the other side and start conversing about what matters to each one. And that's what civility means. Thank you.
Thank you. So I keep looking at this effort as a combination of top-down, having the leaders exhibit the kind of behavior that we want our children and grandchildren to emulate, and also ground level, grassroots, if you will. Talking about from the top down, my understanding is that members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, used to spend far more time in DC. They'd see each other outside of their chambers. They got to knowing their families and shared the joys and tribulations that they each faced. And in fact, the Republicans and the Democrats used to eat in the same dining rooms.
Right.
That, to a large extent, is no longer the case. They rush home to raise more money, to get reelected, as you said, Tomas. I understand they now have separate dining rooms and so on. That to me seems like a real common explanation for why they treat each other so poorly.
Yes.
Well, it is much easier to treat somebody poorly if you don't have a personal relationship with them. There's no doubt about that. And the landscape up on Capitol Hill has changed dramatically in many ways over the last 30 or 40 years. Not only with the members of Congress now flying home every weekend, they're only in DC a short period of time, and they don't know each other well. There are no opportunities, or very few opportunities, I should say. I shouldn't say none, because there are a few, but not many opportunities for them to take the time to build relationships with one another, and particularly with relationships with someone on of a different political party. But also, Tomas referred earlier to the way money speaks and the pressures on members of Congress to do fundraising now is tremendous in ways that it wasn't in the past. And so some of the time that they might have taken to share a meal together, they're having to go to phone banks that are just off of Capitol Hill and put in their time raising money. And so there's all kinds of dynamics that make it harder, but it is not impossible. And there are members of Congress who have good friends across the political aisle. And in an encouraging note, there has been a group formed on Capitol Hill. There's actually a couple groups now. There are two civility caucuses on Capitol Hill, started by members of Congress in Congress to foster a deeper civility. And when Tomas and historically there were other single caucuses, and then more recently when there were two, my first reaction was, well, they can't even work together to have a single caucus. Like, this is kind of oxymoronic, but actually it's not. They each have a different way they are fostering more civility, and some members belong to both caucuses and some only to one or the other. But that is a very positive note that within the body itself, there are people working to foster a deeper civility and to build relationship with their colleagues. And also something that's happened more recently is that I guess you'd call it a commission has been formed within Congress and with some outside consultants as well, looking at ways to structural changes to make Congress work better. And civility is one of, not the only issue, but it's one of the issues that group is looking at, how to make it easier or to make it more conducive to work together across the political aisle than it currently is. And so I see that as a sign of hope. And I'm not sure where that report is. I doubt it will be coming out before the election. But that Congress realizes within itself that changes need to happen, I think is very encouraging.
As I understand it, the Senate doesn't have such a civility caucus. Is there any inkling that you're hearing of them trying to form one or trying to find ways to work better together on their end?
I've not heard of one. I know that there are some initiatives, particularly among the women, shall I say, to meet together, regardless of political party, to have those kind of relationships.
The women are going to lead the way in the Senate, but the Senate has always seen itself as being much more moderate place, and where dialogue takes place and all of that. But I think in recent years we've seen that even the senators aren't able to really talk that much to each other, and the women are the ones that tell us of their efforts, and I believe that it's that woman's group that is up there that is probably the only Senate group that both sides are represented.
I've heard the Senate referred to, the U.S. Senate, I should say, referred to as the greatest deliberative body known to humankind.
Of course, that's right.
But when I watch the hearings, I'm not feeling that way. I mean, it looks like worldwide wrestling sometimes to me.
This is where we need the people's voice.
And the fact that you start off,
just keep writing letters to your member of Congress, to your senators. Just encourage them to be civil, to work with the other side. The more we do that as a people, the more civil government we will get.
Yeah, the fact that you start something off by saying, my respected colleague or what have you, to something Cassandra will relate to. It's like starting off a conversation with bless his heart.
Well, I think I'm going to have to learn to start saying that about my colleague, my respected colleague.
Yeah, you could take a lesson there, couldn't you, Tomas?
We all need to learn. We started this Institute for Civility, and all of our kids have seen us promote civil dialogue. So it's kind of funny when, about 12 or 15 years ago, we were all eating a meal together, and I was over at Cassandra's house, and the dish was over by my son. So I said, butter. And my son looked at me, and he didn't touch it, and I said, butter. And he says, well, is there a civil way to ask for butter, Dad?
Hold us accountable.
Yeah, we're all accountable. We all have to be accountable.
Well, I commend the two of you for the work you do, for your steadfastness in trying to make change. I strongly believe that you are doing it by focus on bridging the generations as you are. I'd like each of you to think of one thing that you would like to leave with our audience, and hopefully that's able to be something that gives them hope for a brighter tomorrow.
Well, I'm going to respond to that with both a challenge and a promise. One of the things we tell people is that, and that we deeply believe, is that regardless of where your passions lie, whether it's civil rights or the environment or economic reform or whatever, civility is foundational to us being able to do anything together, to be able to hold together as a community, as a nation, to overcome whatever challenge that we are faced with. Civility is absolutely foundational and essential. The good news is that if people join the Institute, if you become a member of the Institute or some other civility movement, you are part of the solution and not part of the problem. You are part of a larger whole, and you are a part of bringing about the change that so many of us believe needs to happen, and it can happen. And the more of us that become involved and engaged in this, the more civility seeds are sown and the more that they will bloom.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassandra. Tomas?
Well, we live in this democratic nation, and our founding fathers wanted a constituency that's involved with their elected officials. And so one can start by just choosing one issue. It can be a local issue, a state issue, or a federal issue. And then build a relationship with the office, with an office, and slowly, and become a friend. And when you become a friend of the aide that is working on whatever issue you are involved with, you are helping to make a difference and to make a change. And it just takes persistence. It just takes, just stick with it and do it, and don't be afraid. And now we have many people that are involved in the civility movement. So talk to a civility person in your community and ask them what you can do. But I always say, pick an issue and stay involved, work that issue out. Because as you build a relationship with the office, you learn about the governing process, and you also learn how you can help the governing process. And democracy depends on all of us being engaged.
Thank you. What I'm hearing loud and clear from both of you is we need to, each one of us, be a part of the solution. Otherwise, we're just continue to be part of the problem.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today as we spoke at length with Cassandra Dahnke and Tomas Spath, co-founders of the Institute for Civility and Government. You heard Cassandra talk about becoming a member of the Institute. So I would encourage you to do that, to Google Institute for Civility and Government, and do become a member. And you'll receive periodical newsletters from them and updates as far as the progress they're making, great books that you can read, and different ways that you can get yourself involved. Again, it's my honor to get to call both of you my friend. It's great getting to work with you as we try to repair our world. And every time I start feeling a little bit down, I just need to talk to one of you. And my spirits are raised, and I'm willing to give it another day working on that. So I thank you both for all that you do for me personally and for the civility effort.
Well,
Thank you so much, Russ.
We thank you for your efforts, Russ, and we're grateful that we can contribute and be a part of it.
Thank you.
You're a hero of this age.
Amen.
Quick, hit stop record.